family. You are tuned in to The Making of a Marriage, a sacred conversation about what it truly means to build, nurture, and evolve within a divine partnership. Today, I'm joined with a very special guest, Al Layne, marriage and family therapist who happens to be a Torah teacher. Together, we're going to explore what marriage is beneath the surface, beyond the contracts, the fantasy. We're here to speak to the soul of relationship, the covenant, the mirror, the growth, the joy, and sometimes the necessary breaking open. Whether you're married, single, seeking, or healing, this conversation is for everyone who wants to understand the spiritual blueprint of union and how to build a house that can stand up through storms and seasons. So let's begin. Now, I am so excited that you were able to take the time today to be with us for this very important conversation.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. So let's start it off with the question of what is a marriage anyway?
Well, that's a very interesting question. What is a marriage? Well, let's think of it this way. Let's think of you have two metals, okay, and you melt both of them. So you have in one hand you have silver, and the other hand you have gold, and you melt these two things, and they're able to bond together in a way where they become inextricable. In other words, you can't separate them. Another way that I describe that is the Play-Doh that children use. So you have a yellow piece of Play-Doh and you have a green piece of Play-Doh, and you work it together. You really kind of squeeze it and you work it in. And then before long, what you have is you have a Play-Doh that's yellow with green streaks or green with yellow streaks, and some parts of it, exactly, it's so well worked together that it's now kind of getting brown, and now you can't pull it apart, right? So that's what marriage is intended to be, okay? But let's just remember, okay, all of that heating up of the metal and the crushing together and working, that's painful. Right? So that
It
takes
certainly can be. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Yes, but looking at the spiritual piece of this, because certainly everything is spiritual,
Of course.
right? So what spiritual covenant or energetic alignment is taking place here? What do you think?
That's a wonderful question. So if you're thinking in terms of the materiality of the world, if your philosophy is material, that which you can touch, taste, and feel, then you miss a lot of what marriage is about. And so when you think in terms of what we talk about from time to time, energy, frequency, and vibration, what does that mean? It means that there's more to us than meets the eye, right? If you think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, what you're talking about is two people coming together. Now, these are two very different people, and they are beginning to make very positive connections, right? Now, when we talk about spirituality, the religious connotation often is where our mind goes. Okay, but if we could deconstruct that for a moment and consider another possibility, another way of describing spirituality. And the way I describe it is spirituality is about connections. Okay, if spirituality is about connections, then there are negative connections and there are positive connections. So when you're fighting, that's a negative connection. When you are cuddling, when you're having loving conversations, that's a positive connection.
Definitely positive.
what makes a difference in terms of switching from an idea that is kind of materialistic to an idea that's energetic is these connections can be measured, right? If you're thinking in terms of religious terms, right, which is really mystical and mythical. Um, in other words, this is not something you can explain.
It's about
If you think
experience, right?
it's no, this is the interesting thing. If you're thinking in terms of things that are mystical and mythical, it's not about experience. But if you're thinking in terms of connections, no, it's about experience.
Yes.
How are you experiencing those connections? Are you
Yes.
experiencing them in a positive way? In other words, having had this connection, do you feel loved and appreciated? Or if you're fighting, having had that connection, how do you feel? Do you feel awful? Do you feel like you ought to be away from this other person?
Mm.
So once you've redefined spirituality as connections, then you can measure the type of connections that you're experiencing, and you can increase and improve those connections.
Yes. And as a teacher, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you understand the idea that over time with repetition, we
Mm-hmm.
begin to teach one another how to be with us.
Mm-hmm. Ex- Precisely.
Mm. Mhm.
And so if we're both paying attention and we both have the attitude of a learner,
Mm.
then we begin to notice how that person uh, with whom we've offered to spend our entire lives, how they want to be treated
Without them having to say anything. I think, um,
without them having to say anything.
right? And a lot
Yes.
of the confusion comes in is
Mm-hmm.
where men have a different way, right, of
Mm-hmm.
perceiving information or
Mm-hmm.
expressing love. You know, for a
Mm-hmm.
man, it might be that I'm sharing my finances with you, I'm taking care of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is showing my love. I'm protecting you.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, a woman, you know, may desire
Mm-hmm.
to get that in a way that is different from the way that the man feels that he expresses it, right?
Mm-hmm.
She
Mm-hmm.
might want more cuddles, you know, as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
that oxytocin going.
Of course. Of course.
She may want to receive compliments at how
Mm-hmm.
she looks nice or she smells
Mm-hmm.
good or he
Mm-hmm.
loves, you know, the way she does something, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just that understanding, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where we begin to learn that
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Mm-hmm.
this person needs something slightly different from the way I need it. And and actually be okay with it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Accepting that the
Well,
person may want something other than what you think they should want. Right?
so having said that, here's a question because it's wonderful that we're here together. Um, I would say opposite sex, but I prefer to say complementary sex.
I,
you're
that
you're
that
female.
has a better vibrational
That,
frequency to it.
that has a better vibration frequency. What are some of the things? Uh, what are some of the things that you look for as a woman in terms of the relationship? What are some of the things that would make the relationship for you as a woman uh, more accommodating, more pleasant? Uh, that just makes you feel good being in that relationship.
Well, I laid out a couple of them, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
what I just mentioned about the compliments, the appreciation, you know, for the
Mm-hmm.
things that I do. Perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as I am maturing, to know that
Mm-hmm.
I still am attractive, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
that type
Mm-hmm.
of thing. But also to be heard, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that in our society and culture, it is still quote unquote a man's world,
Mm-hmm.
even though Many women, especially those of us who were born in the 60s and beyond,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
after the bra burning era,
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
have these rights, right, as women. Um, but we do want to be heard. We want to know that our feelings, our
Mm-hmm.
ideas, you know, are respected and valued,
Mm-hmm.
on an equal level with what
Mm-hmm.
the man may decide,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to be in a partnership. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's very important for women, especially these days. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think in years past, my grandmother's era, many women would have appreciated that, even though they might not have had the voice to really ask for it back
Mm-hmm.
then, right? But yes, the idea that I am a valued partner
Mm-hmm.
in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that at the same time, I
Mm-hmm.
do appreciate the chivalry. I do like doors open for
Mm-hmm.
me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do
Mm-hmm.
want to feel that I'm protected and safe,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those things are very important for a woman. And
Mm-hmm.
and just the pointer for young men, if you're out there,
Mm-hmm.
you do want to make sure that you do appear to women
Mm-hmm.
um, to be a person who can take care of her and
Mm-hmm.
protect her. Even if a woman isn't aware of this consciously,
Mm-hmm.
she is on the subconscious level. Hey, I have children with
Mm-hmm.
this person. Are we going to be taken care of?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is he going to make this good decisions for
Mm-hmm.
us?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are things that are very important for women. We do want to know that we're
Mm-hmm.
going to be taken care of, and any offspring we may have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just to belabor it, that
Mm-hmm.
we have a value in our
Mm-hmm.
opinions and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's very interesting is that you have just described uh, a very, and I use the word primordial carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but these are what one might describe as primordial instincts. In
Yes.
other words, they're existential. So what Western culture has done is Western culture has imposed a new reality on relationships, a thought out and an imagined reality that
Mm-hmm.
does not necessarily reflect uh, the relationship
Mm-hmm.
in its native or natural state.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you uh, talked about feeling protected and cared for. So, often when I'm working with couples, I'm saying to them, one of the reasons that relationships fail is not because there's fundamentally anything wrong with the relationship, but you're not using the rules. Any game that you play, whether it's the courting game, whether it's whatever it is, and I'm just using that euphemistically, there are rules.
Yes.
If you apply the rules, you get a better chance of winning the game.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're breaking all the rules, it's very unlikely that you're going to win. So, for example, fundamental in a woman's DNA is this idea that the man she wants to commit her life to will take care of her and protect her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a lot of elements of taking care. There's the financial, there's the emotional, and so on. We can go on with that. But
Yeah.
that's effectively what one
Mm-hmm.
requires of the man, right? But on the other hand, what the man really requires is the man requires, and this is in his DNA, a woman who is going to respect him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important to every man, and affirm him,
Yes.
right? Now, that's very important to the relationship and the success of the marriage,
Yes. And
both financial.
just
Mm-hmm.
to excuse me, but before you move on, just to
Mm-hmm.
clarify, affirming is
Mm-hmm.
yes. And is that meaning that goes with respect,
Mm-hmm.
but it it also goes with how she makes him feel. Is that
Exactly.
okay?
Precisely. That he feels affirmed. He feels as though he's useful,
Mhm,
uh, that she looks up to him
mhm,
as her husband or as her man, uh, and that she does not become his major critic.
mm,
I've seen couples
very.
where uh, the wife and sometimes the man as well, uh, who assumes that their responsibility is to make him or make her perfect. And therefore, we pay attention to all the things that are going wrong. And the things that are going right are just simply expectations. Well, I expected you to do that. Oh, you're the man of the house. What do you think? You're supposed to be doing that.
Yes,
And sometimes we miss it.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. What we're speaking to here on both sides is
Mhm.
appreciation and not silent appreciation, but expressed
There you go.
appreciation, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
There you go.
Hmm.
So one of the other things that I would say in that regard is so from time to time women will come in and they will say to me, in their own way because they're upset. As a therapist, people come to me when they're upset. Right? It'd be
Always,
nice if they came to. It'd be
right?
nice if they came when everything was going fine.
Fix this.
Yeah.
Fix him.
so, um,
Fix
so
her.
what happens occasionally is, a woman would come in and says, he doesn't respect me. He needs to respect me. And I say to them, but that's not really what you need. And usually she's stuck and she said, what do you mean by that? I said, I, so I draw an analogy. He says, there are these fish called koi's. It's a koi. It's a big orange, it's a wonderful fish. Of course, pretty large. Um, and I said, but it has food, right? You can go to the pet store and you can buy pellets for koi's, right? They're multicolored, and they're all about maybe like a quarter of an inch uh, square. But you can also go to the pet store and you can get uh, pellets for cats, which is also about a quarter inch square, and it looks the same. All right. And so in a marriage, in a relationship, what you want to do is that you want to give the husband what he needs. You want to give the koi pellets, and you want to give the cat pellets, right? Because if you give the koi cat pellets and you give the cat koi pellets, it's not been designed for them. They're going to get ill, right? So this is exactly what we're talking about. What does a man need in a relationship? And so I'm having this conversation. I'm saying, in a relationship, a man needs respect. That's what he needs from you. What you need in a relationship is honor,
Mhm.
right? And then the question that's asked is, what do you mean? I say, okay, respect is treating the other party the way you want to be treated. So the woman treats the man the way she wants to be treated. And then so she says to me, okay, so then what is honor? I says, honor is treating the other person more highly than you expect to be treated.
Okay.
And I say to them, so this is how it works. I say, think about it for a minute. Okay. So your husband treats you with honor, which elevates you above himself. And then you treat him with respect, which lifts him up to where you are.
Mm.
And what begins to happen is this amazing synergy between the two of you. He's not shouting at you and screaming at you and calling you names, but he's trying to understand. And so he's treating you with honor, right? And what you're doing is you want to treat him the way he's treating you. And so you reciprocate. And now you want to understand,
There we are.
right? And now you have this very beautiful synergy. It takes time, but it's well worth the effort.
That's beautiful. Yes. And so this is speaking directly to um, the answer to
Mm-hmm.
the huge breakdown of marriage that we have in the Western society. This is huge. This covers everything, if you really think about it. Um, but but what did our ancestors understand about the sacred union that we might have forgotten?
Well, remember, our ancestors were very concrete in their thinking,
Mm.
right? And what does that mean? It means, for example, that a woman bears children. And so there's an implication there. It is within her womb that the entire civilization
Mm.
rests. And so she needs to be cared for and protected. So I've had a conversation one day uh, with a client that came in. And I said to him, I says, have you ever observed the sparrow as he builds a nest? He said, yes. My house is kind of in a place where birds nest and so on. I said, fantastic. Tell me what you've observed. He says, well, usually two sparrows will build a nest, right? There's one that's bringing the straw, and then there's another one that's knitting, and occasionally the two of them will be there weaving. I said, okay, what else have you observed? He says, well, once the nest is built, um, there's usually one sparrow in the nest, and then there's usually one sitting outside somewhere, and one will go and bring food and so on. And then as the eggs hatch, then they seem to take turns bringing the food. One will stay in. I said, well, that's very, very interesting. So then I asked the question. I said, well, so the two of them build the nest, but who's the nest being built for? So he thought for a minute, and I said, well, based on what I'm observing, the nest seems to be built for the female sparrow because she's the one that has to lay the eggs and so on. Mm. Or our ancestors understood this. And so our ancestors built the house for the woman and for the children. Mm. And so it was her house. It's her domain. And then, of course, our ancestors would go off and build themselves another little house somewhere, right? Which is usually right next door within the compound or what have you. Because it was also understood that women and men are very different. Women tend to get emotional, particularly as their menstrual cycle goes on. And so what we often have seen is that there is a separation of the women and there's a separation of the men. Mm-hmm. Even in marriage, but the separation is not hard and it's not fixed. All it is that it gives the woman an opportunity to be by herself if she wants to, but she can also come over to the husband and vice versa, right? Mm-hmm. It provides this very unique opportunity where there is community and synergy between the husband and the wife, but there's also this individual thing. So right. The husband can have his chair against the window, the woman can decorate the entire place in her place, and he's not criticizing her for moving the chair. It's very interesting.
It is. Right? There's not this forced smashing.
Exactly.
There's room.
Right? Yeah. There's space to breathe. Mm-hmm. Right. What we've done in Western culture is that we've and arguably because it's financially viable within Western society. But in fact, what we do is we build very large houses in Western society, to which really kind of creates some challenges for us financially. And then we cohabit that house and scream and shout at each other. Right. Now that's just an example of how Asian society saw the relationship. So the woman is taken care of. If you look at African society, the men go out in the morning and they catch the animals and they bring them back and they skin them and then they bring them to the women. Mm-hmm. And the woman takes care of the provision and whatever needs to be done. Mm-hmm. Right? In Western society, both men and women go go out, so there's nobody to take care of the children.
Outsiders taking care of the children. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, and then of course, when the woman comes home, she's stressed and he's stressed. And now within that relationship that occurs within a single unit, the home, then they've got to really kind of figure out, how do I de-stress from my day and not bring the challenges of work into my day. And the fundamental problem with that, as I see it as a therapist, is you don't really get to see your children. Because by the time the children return home, you have maybe 2 hours with them, if at all possible, before they're ready to go to bed or what have you. So it's not just about the relationship between a man and a woman, but it's what does that relationship mean within the context of the home and the family, and then in the broader society.
Yes. Yeah. And the answer to that, what I've seen, is that a lot of men are creating man caves.
Yes.
Whether it is whether it is a shed in the back, or he has, a wonderful cave he's created with everything the way that he likes it. And so he can go there after work and he can kind of decompress, right? And the woman has her space to decompress, and that makes it easier. That's more natural.
It is more natural
than where we find ourselves in, if you will, captivity.
Exactly.
living a life that is not natural to us. Yeah.
That's a very interesting word you use, captivity. Because from time to time, people will come and tell me, I feel like I'm in prison.
Yeah.
Right? In the relationship. And I'm asking, but why do you feel that way? Right? Because, it's like, he's always there. There's no space to breathe. He's always wants to touch. Right? And that makes perfect sense. So I think that our ancestors had an existential relationship, not just with marriage and with each other, but also with their environment. And they learned from, as we talked about the sparrow, they learned from that.
From nature. There was more time to observe. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, we're speaking about the culture that we're embedded in, right? And of course, we're living sometimes parallel lives within it. And sometimes we're trying to live up to these standards, which are foreign. So that takes us to the next question. What do you think the biggest myths and unrealistic expectations are that we carry into a marriage? Whether it is the fantasy from the media, like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best. What do you think?
I think the biggest myth, and I think this myth is it's a myth that's internalized from the society, from Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and the Crosby Show.
Oh, the Huxtables, of course.
And exactly, right. And it is that my husband's going to make me happy, or my wife's going to make me happy, or my husband is my savior, or my wife is my savior. And there is context for that. If a woman or man experiences a family of origin, in other words, the family from which they came, in a dysfunctional way, there's arguing and fighting. There's a sense of not being safe, not being affirmed. It is natural for that individual to want to create an environment that is affirming and so on. I think one of the biggest myths is my spouse is going to make me happy, right? And so my response to that often in therapy is well, when you talk about happy, tell me what you mean
What
by
does that
happy,
mean?
and that's usually kind of difficult for them to articulate. And so then, what I try to do is I try to give them a sense of when I talk about happiness, what I'm talking about. So I say happiness is it's December 25th, at 6 in the morning, and there's a key on your pillow, and there is a ribbon that runs all the way out through the bedroom, down the corridor, out to the front door, and onto the door of the BMW.
Whoa.
Right? So this is your Christmas gift. And so you're very excited. You walk out and you see the car, and there's lots of kiss and hugs and everything, and you're absolutely elated that your husband has just bought you a BMW. So that's December 25th, right? So you drive it for about a month. You have great times driving and so on, all the different features, you know. And then your husband says to you around early spring, he says, look, you know, we only have room for two cars in the garage, right? And so you need to sell the Chevrolet so that, you know, we can put the BMW in, right? Out of the weather. And so you go off and sell the Chevrolet, and you know, you don't get a great price for it, but you have the BMW. Who cares? And then you take your BMW into the shop for service for the first service, which is free. And then you get an invoice for $1,000, right? And you go like, I thought the first service was free. And so yeah, well, the the service is free, but the parts are. So you just spent $1,000 in parts
Mhm.
for BMW, and you've been servicing your Chevrolet for the last 6 years, and it's like $150 every time you service it, right? Inclusive of parts.
Mhm.
And the gas bill was like, you know, like $40 a week. Now you're paying like $150 a week. All of a sudden, you're not happy anymore, right? So that's happiness. And so what I
Fleeting.
say to them, exactly, it fades, right? So then what I say to them is, I can't offer you happiness, but what I can offer you is joy. They say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you know, joy is something that comes from inside of you.
Yes.
It's not external and then goes in, it comes out.
Mm.
This sense of understanding that life unfolds the way it's supposed to, and everything's just going to be perfect,
Mm.
right? It
Mhm.
requires a changing in philosophy. It requires that you pay more attention to yourself, improving yourself, being less critical of others around you, and
Mhm.
getting all, you know, into the muck and mire of who's doing what and how, and beginning to appreciate yourself and appreciate others for who they are,
Yes.
right? And then what emerges from that eventually is a sense of joy. You're just it's just a great day because it is, right? The sun came
Yes.
out today, you know, flowers, it's spring, you know, the winters. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yes. And you know what happens as a result of that, taking on this as your new perspective, your new
Mhm.
worldview, right? What happens is that unhealed childhood stuff just gets healed automatically. All those needs
Exactly.
are filled.
Mhm. Exactly.
So,
Because that's where a lot of it comes from. These expectations uh, that are unrealistic. And the only reason they're unrealistic is that the person that you are imposing these expectations are, this is not the person that you perceive to be. That person may just simply not be able to meet those expectations. Those expectations may have come from the Huxtables,
exactly.
right? And also, what's also interesting is you've just been married a year or two, and the Huxtables, uh, in character, they've been together for a while.
A while. And they ran
Yeah,
their marriage like a business, did they not?
they did they not? Exactly. There you go.
Yes. Hmm.
So it's interesting as you begin to look at relationships and see how they work, and that, you know, as I said earlier, one of the reasons that I find a lot of relationships breakdown is because we're just using not we don't understand the rules, and so we're
Yeah.
breaking them. And so from time to time, which is shocking to some couples when they come in. Uh, I look at couples and I say, "Well, hold on a minute. So why are you here to see me? Your marriage is fine. There's nothing wrong with your marriage." So I had a couple that came in, this was 6 months ago, and they were separated for about 6 months, and I'm having conversations with them. So I said, "Well, why are you here?" So we're separated. I said, "Okay, I understand that, but why are you here?" Because there's nothing wrong with your marriage. Do you love him? Yes, I do, to pieces. Do you love her? Yes, I do. Okay. Do you want to have sex with her? Yes. Do you want to? Yes. So what's the problem? So, well, does he pay the bills and so? Yes. So what's the problem? And as it turns out, each time the problem is in here. It's what you think. The problem is what you think it is, right? Well, we're not really communicating, but the fundamentals of the marriage, both of them want to be in the relationship. Both of them are doing the things that they need to be in the relationship, but the way they communicate is very different. And that is what's created the challenge. Because, again, if you go back, okay, you treat him the way you want to be treated, and you treat her in a way that esteems her above your needs, right? And so this is an interesting couple. So they came in for one session, and then they didn't come back for a while. Then they came back in. The wife comes in for another session. We had conversations. And the second time she came in, she says to me, well, the relationship is a lot better. She says, we still separate. I'm living by mom and he's still living by himself. But the relationship is a lot better. So I said, well, what are you doing differently? We just kind of followed your advice. And I said, well, what advice did I give you that you're following that's making the relationship better? We just, I'm not jumping to conclusions, and I'm allowing you
That's
to
it.
talk and listening and trying to understand and clarifying and all that. So that's absolutely fantastic. And he says, wow, okay. They're back together. No, but they've only had like 3 sessions with me. And this is a secret, so we can't let the others know. Right? This is just between the two of us.
Okay. All right.
So the wife comes in one day, she says to me, she says, I'm thinking about getting a boyfriend. I says, well, why do you want to do that? She says, I haven't had sex for about 6 months. So I said, what about your husband? She says, I said, okay, let me give you a little advice. This is what I want you to do. I want you to call him up, and I want you to say to him, I'm coming over because I want you to make love to me. She says, I can't do that. So I said, why not? He's your husband. She says, but he's not going to take that. He's not going to. I said, okay, listen, this is homework. Just try it.
Just try it.
Just try it, right? So then she calls me up, and she says to me, by the way, I just want you to know we're back together. I said, okay, so what happened? Well, I did what you recommended. I said, what did you do? She said, I called him and tell him I'm coming Friday. Want to have sex. And I said, what did he say? She said, initially when I said that, he was stumped. He was silent. He didn't say a word. And then he said, well, okay, if that's what you want to, that's fine. Right? And so that was the only piece that was missing. It was just breaking the ice between them. Right? So sometimes that's all that's needed.
Yeah, there was an assumption, right? There was an assumption going on
There
that
you
somehow he wasn't interested, right?
Exactly.
And perhaps he had the same assumption.
We had to say he had the exact same assumption, as it turns out. Right?
Wow.
So it's just risking. It was just taking the risk.
Yes.
To call.
Yes. Right? And that right there is personal growth.
That
this
significant.
Can span out into all relationships, whether it's at work, whether it's with siblings, with parents, right? Expressing our needs, letting people know. I mean, it's only fair for them, and it's fair for us.
Exactly.
Read our minds.
Exactly. And
Wow.
I've seen that over and over again, where people begin to have conversations,
Mhm.
um, and now you're not talking at each other, but you're communicating.
You
So
communicating.
yeah, so
Yes.
you're asking questions. Well, what do you mean by that, right?
Yes.
And the reason that's important is that uh, if if you think in terms of men are from well, women are from Venus and men are from
You're
Mars,
from Mars.
the communication languages and styles are very, very different.
Very different the way that we
Yeah,
are acculturated.
there you go. So you
Just
do
say.
want to ask questions. What do you mean
Hmm.
when you say such and such?
Hmm.
And often what we discover is that what we thought because of our culture, because of the upbringing within our home, because of the communication patterns within our homes, that
Okay.
what's being said, which comes from a very different set of communication patterns and so on, is very different, but it clarifies it. And
Hmm.
so it's like, oh, I didn't know that's what you meant, right?
Exactly.
And it what it does, it saves a lot of the misunderstanding and then
It
the
does.
clashes that result as a result of those misunderstandings.
And it makes things very interesting. You are constantly
Mm-hmm.
discovering this other person as the two of you are evolving and growing. And it's like you're growing hand in hand rather
There
than
you go.
apart. So
Absolutely.
that takes us to that next question. So
Mm-hmm.
so of course we just talked about in communication. So
Mm-hmm.
in what other ways do we grow as individuals within a relationship that
Mm-hmm.
we can't grow outside of it, if that makes sense, because
That
of the
makes perfect
relationship,
sense.
right?
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Let me give you a practical example. All right. So you have a couple who gets married in the very early 20s,
Babies.
right? Right, babies. By their 30s, they've had children.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, in their 30s, their children are out to school most of the day.
Mhm.
And so both the husband and the wife now have got about 7 hours in the day where they don't have the children
Mhm. Mhm.
to do things with, take to school and so on and so forth, right? Other people are taking care of the kids. So the wife goes back to school, right? While the husband is supporting the home. And she goes back and it takes her a little while and she finishes her degree. And she's still at home. So she's finished her maybe first or second degree. And she's still at home, taking care of the kids. Right? So now the kids are growing. So now the kids are beginning to get into their teens. And so she has a degree, uh, advanced education. And the husband has an advanced certification as well. Okay. Because while she was having the kids and taking care of them, he was studying and kind of helping himself to uh, achieve greater levels of uh, um, academia.
Mhm.
Right? And this is just an example. It happens in different ways.
Yes.
But she's taking care of the kids, he's studying. Now, to a large extent, he takes care of the kids when she has to do her homework and studies, and she's studying. Immediately, what that does is it tells the kids that my dad is a professional, my mom is a professional.
Mhm.
And what we know is that children become their parents to a large
Yes.
extent,
Yes.
right? So there's not a lot of motivation that needs to be done
Mhm.
to get the thinking to focus, get the kids to focus on, because that's part of the culture in the home, right?
Exactly. Mm.
And so what you have now is that you have a wife, actual example, who's who's established an online company and she's helping people to do business and to establish business plans and so on while he's out working,
Mhm.
right? So now she has an income. The kids are now in their teens. And so they're kind of getting to develop their lives and so on their own. But she's able to accommodate all of this. So she gets up, she cooks, she cleans, she does the things she needs to do, and she works. And then the kids come out of school around 2, so she goes get them, or he gets them if she's working. And what you begin to realize is that this coming together and sharing and developing together
Yes.
provides opportunities that would not have been available outside of that couple
Of the
relationship.
couple relationship. Yes.
Exactly. Right?
Beautiful. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's just one example,
Yeah.
right? And there are others, but effectively, if you think in terms of, even if you think in terms of saving money, right? It's
Yes.
cheaper for two to live in in a single in a marriage relationship than to live separately. I
It
mean,
is
just
so
rents,
true. Childcare. Oh,
childcare, exactly.
oh, you share that, you save lots and
There you
lots.
go. Okay,
Mhm. Yeah.
so it is not then beyond the imagination why statistically people who are married do better financially,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? In spite of college and university costs and all of that, because they don't have to spend as much,
Right.
right? And they tend to make more money,
Hmm.
which makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
partnership.
it's
Wonderful.
a partnership.
Yes.
There you go.
Hmm.
So marriage. Listen, uh, the Creator made marriage
Hmm.
as the perfect institution to bring about and support the family. And as we grow older, the examples that are shown, the culture, the socialization
Hmm.
that's so shown. So by the time parents become get into their 40s and 50s, they have aging parents, and they're taking care of their aging parents. And you have the children seeing that.
Yes.
And then as the grandparents transition,
Hmm.
then the children have already observed that my responsibility as a son or as a daughter is to take care of my mom and my dad. Why? Because that's what they did.
Yes.
And so this is a complete cycle, and this cycle works very well. But unfortunately, what has happened within Western society
Mhm.
is, we have all these industries, and the economy, of course, has to work, and everybody has
Yeah.
to get a piece of it. So mom and dad gets put into a home,
Hmm.
which essentially, depending on how long they survive in their homes, will take away all of what might be an inheritance, right?
Wow.
So it
Wow.
really does, if you're thinking in terms of how the ancients did it, how our ancestors did it, it was
Yes.
very practical,
Hmm.
right? But in our society today, it's very, very difficult.
It really is.
Um, yeah, very difficult to make marriages work, and then to be able to see how a a, a functional relationship has a positive impact in everybody's life through the entire lifespan.
It does. That ancient wisdom, I mean, you touched on my next question.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about African society before
Mm-hmm.
colonization,
Mm-hmm.
how the structures worked.
Uh-huh.
We see it in Torah. Torah is
Mm-hmm.
African,
Of course it
and
is.
it's talking about how
Mm-hmm.
we lived. I mean, certainly there are the so-called laws, statutes, and
Mm-hmm.
commandments, but I
Mm-hmm.
look at them more as an instruction manual on
Mm-hmm.
how to live
Mm-hmm.
successfully,
Mm-hmm.
right? What does that teach us within?
Mm-hmm.
If you can think of um, maybe some examples in scripture where we can see
Mm-hmm.
how this way of functioning, where everyone was taken care of, was laid out.
Yes. Well, what's beautiful about the Torah, and I'm very pleased that you kind of reframed uh, or perhaps redefined this thing, this question of the Torah. What is the Torah? Well, if you go back to the ancient Hebrew, Torah's teachings are instructions.
Yes.
And the reason that is important is if you define Torah as law, then what in fact you've done is you've inferred a system that is not implied. It's not explicit or implicit in Torah. This is this idea of law and punishment.
Punishment. Yeah.
Yeah. So if your idea is its law, then when you look at the Torah and you see how it's been translated into English, then this notion of law and punishment, right? If you don't do what the Creator, what God says, then God is going to punish you. If you understand that the Torah is really teachings and instructions, it's a very different thing.
Very different.
So the instructions are existential. What does that mean? It is based on reality. So when, for example, the Creator says, honor your mother and father, that your days may be long upon the land, which the Lord thy God has given thee. And another place it says, which is the first commandment, promise. What it's saying is that your parents have traveled the way that you were preparing to travel. They've got the roadmap. They know where the potholes are. They know where the cliff edges lie. And so they're giving you instructions, right? And so you come back now when you think in terms of what we're talking about, honor. You esteem them more highly than you esteem yourself.
Hello.
So you pay attention, you listen, right? And what the Creator says is if you honor your mother and father, He says you'll live a long time. Why? Because they're going to foreshadow all of the challenges that you're going to have up ahead. So they'll tell you, you come to the fork in the road, don't turn right, turn left.
Yes.
Right? So that's an instruction. If you follow the teachings of the Torah, which are instructions, the Creator says, you will come out this way. And it's constantly being repeated over and over again.
Over and over.
Torah, you're going to prosper, you're going to do this. But what are the teachings of the Torah? So the teachings of the Torah are, how do I relate to myself? Right?
Self first. Yeah.
Self first. How do I relate to me? Okay. So you keep the teachings of the Torah. It tells you should do this, you should do that, you should do the next, and you should do this, all these wonderful things that you should do. But it also tells you how to relate to others, right? Don't be covetous, don't kill, don't steal.
Don't take other people's stuff.
Don't take other people's stuff. So it gives you a template for living. Why? Because if you take other people's stuff, they're going to want to take your stuff, right?
Hello.
You're going to want it back. All right. So how does the Torah, in terms of our relationship, works? All right. So let's think about this. I think it's Proverbs 31, right? This virtuous woman. And it starts off very wonderful. It says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her value is above rubies. Well, what does that mean? It's financial. It's money. It's wealth. It's assets.
Right. And this is Solomon, yes?
This is Solomon.
This is Solomon.
Okay. Her value is above rubies. What does that mean? It means that there is this inherent value in having a woman who's virtuous.
Who's virtuous.
You could argue, well, that doesn't really make any sense. But continue to read it. What does it say? It says she gets up early in the morning, she takes care of her servants. She gives them instructions for the work that she needs to do. It goes on and it says, okay, and she goes off and she buys purple and she sells it and she's sewing and so on. She sees land and she buys it. These are assets because she's a virtuous woman. And then you look and see, where's the guy? Where's the husband? Well, he's sitting in the gate with the other guys. And the other guys are saying, I'm very impressed with your wife. She's doing all this wonderful stuff. And then I asked the question, where did she get all this money from to start these businesses that she's doing? Well, she got it from him. Right? So earlier you asked the question about individual growth. Yes. Well, this is what we're talking about. So she's growing. Now, let me share a quick, very, very quick story from you. So I was in Israel a couple of years ago. And so we were having dinner at uh, with a Bedouin family, right? Um, and so uh, the husband's sharing the story. So he says, my wife has been doing stuff. He's lost his job. And he says, my wife, when he lost his job, he said that his wife has been making cosmetic products, right?
Mhm.
And so she has girls that helps her. And she came to him one day and she said, look, I've been doing this in the kitchen. And he says the kitchen is too small. The girls are always wrong. Everything is really untidy. She says to him, we really need to. I need a place, right? And she says, and I've spoken to a builder, and he tells me the place I need is going to be about $30,000. And he goes like, I would love to do this for you, honey, but I just don't have the money.
Mhm.
And he says that she says, well, hold on, I'll be right back. So she went inside and she came back out. And in her hand, she had a bag with $30,000 that she'd gotten for all these years from selling cosmetic products.
Mhm.
Within a functional marital relationship, the growth of both parties become exponential.
Mhm.
One, because the husband provides the opportunity for her to grow, whether it's financially or what have you. But what she does for the husband is even greater.
Mhm.
She says to her husband, for example, honey, you can do it. You can do it. You're going to be brilliant. You're going to be brilliant at this. Don't let anybody stop you. And she's
Mhm.
constantly supporting him, constantly telling him, you can do that. You're just great, right? Remember, at this point, the world's telling him he can't.
He's lost his job. That's right.
Exactly.
You know
And
what this
she's
says?
looking, huh?
Oh, go ahead. Go finish the thought.
She's looking into his heart and soul. And she knows this man she loves
Mhm.
and has been married to for however long.
Mhm.
And she says, honey, you can do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And now she is the proverbial wind under his wings. And
Yeah,
as he gets more success, she gets more success
that's it.
because he does the same thing to her.
It's a partnership,
It's a partnership,
you know?
right?
And what is it about the Western culture that we're in that creates competition between the spouses? The, that
Well,
ego-based
mhm.
competitiveness, you see.
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. Um, and if you go back to the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, you begin to see that there's been a lot of social, uh, there's
And
been a lot of social change.
yes.
That social change has been driven by social engineering.
Hmm.
So women had to be in the workforce because now we could tax both people. Okay,
Hmm.
that was part of the agenda. We need to
That's
have both men and women.
right. That's
Exactly.
right.
Right. So now you have another problem. If you bring women into the workforce, then men and women over time began to compete for the same job.
Hmm.
All right. So now you have unemployment, which is continuing to rise. And one of the reasons for that is because you've got twice as many people effectively in the workplace.
Right.
Everybody has an apartment, right?
Hmm.
So the one lady has children, and the husband, well, the boyfriend has children, and we're no longer having children together. And now what has also happened is everybody's making more money, but seem to be poorer,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Less able to, we can buy a lot of things,
Hmm.
but in terms of those things that really make sense, being able to put aside money for retirement, being able to buy quality over quantity, right? We can no longer no longer afford things that have quality. So everything's got to
Mhm.
be purchased from Walmart or some other place where it's cheap,
Right, right.
right?
And
Because
there
we
is
can.
that there
Mhm.
and I was just going to say and there's that consumption mindset
Precisely.
as
Yeah.
opposed to,
Hmm.
the Bedouin family that you mentioned that you
Hmm.
saw when you were in Israel,
Hmm.
where there is this partnership, there
There you
is
go.
this investor's mindset,
There
investing in
you
our
go.
future
Hmm. Hmm.
together.
Hmm.
Yeah.
There you go. And
Mm.
that's perfect. And that's what's interesting. And we talk about ancestors, but if you go back 100 years, 150 years, you'll see that we were doing the exact same thing that many of the more African ancestors were doing.
It's true.
Very practical.
Mhm.
We got married and we stayed married. Why? Because
Mhm.
well, we didn't know anything else,
Yes.
right? And I would also like to say, as I said, I don't do very much premarital uh, counseling or anything like that. I normally see them after they,
Afterwards.
yeah, afterwards. Um, but I say to them all the time, I say to couples when they come in, um, if if you understand how it works, if you understood how it works to begin with, and you work, so one of the ways of saying this is you plan your work and work your plan, right?
Yes.
If you understand how it works,
Mhm.
then you plan your work and work your plan. But the moment that you think in terms of divorce, if you go into a relationship where divorce is an option,
It's an option.
that's if things don't go well, that's the option you would take. If
Mhm.
you go into relationships where divorce is not an option, then you try to figure a way, how do we work this out where
How
we're
do we
not
make
killing
this
each other?
happen? And you know what that brings to mind is the whole institution of a marriage. Why
Mm-hmm.
get married? What is the purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Then you strive to work together to maintain that thing. But if your
Mm-hmm.
purpose is flawed in the first place, there's a
Exactly.
problem, right?
Exactly. What are you working towards? What is the goal?
Hmm.
Right? The goal in a marriage is to be wealthier, to be healthier,
Healthier.
wealthier and healthier, and in a better position than you were when you started.
Exactly. And to create
Mhm.
a legacy, there are children who
And
are
to create
going
a
to
legacy.
pass on your name.
There you go. There you go.
And what
And
is
there's
better than that?
there's also this idea of generational wealth. So
Yes.
we
Mhm.
we build, we teach our children to build. They come and they build and teach their children to build.
Mhm, mhm.
And so with each generation, we're moving further and further away from poverty. But
Yes.
with the single parenting and so on that we're seeing, with the changes that have occurred in society that have
Yes.
been socially engineered, then it means that we are effectively kept poor.
Yes,
Uh,
we're selecting, mates, or we're looking for a mate because they're
mhm.
cute or they're fine or
There you go. There
they
you go.
have a good body or something. We're not seeing
Precisely.
beyond what's real.
Exactly.
The
That
other
is
day,
exactly what it is. Yeah.
but we also spoke to some other cultures, say in
Hmm.
India, where
Hmm.
marriages are still arranged,
Hmm.
and that this was also in the
Hmm.
African culture too, was it
Of
not?
course.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Hmm.
And if you really think about it, and people hearing me go from absolutely, that's if you think about it, and I've said this to uh, some of my clients. So the idea of a parent selecting a mate for a son or a daughter uh, is frowned upon, right? But then I have to remind them, listen, your mother does not want ugly grandchildren. Because that's usually that's usually, well, suppose she's ugly. But your mother and dad, they don't want any ugly
Not going to
grandchildren,
do that.
right? You are more likely to give them ugly grandchildren without their help than they are to give you a wife that's going to give you ugly grandchildren or a husband. Okay, so let's start there. Okay, also, and perhaps more importantly, is if you understand marriage, marriage is bringing two families together
Mm.
because that's effectively what happens,
That is an
right?
excellent point. We always have, I don't know,
Yeah.
over here on the States, I know that you're in Barbados,
Hmm.
that we talk about the in-law issues.
There you go. So you're bringing two families together.
Yes.
And so some of the questions that are asked when mom and dad are involved is who's the family,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? What do they have?
Yeah.
What is their culture? Where are they from? Because all of these are factors that play out in marriage. And if you're not prepared for those factors, right? So you're a Christian and she's a Muslim. What
Hmm.
are the children going to be? Are the children going to be Christian or Muslim? That's a major problem there,
It is. It can be a challenge. Yeah.
right? But you met at university, and so she's educated, you're educated, but we will figure it out. Mom
Mm.
and dad saying, you're not going to figure that out. You have to, before you get married, you have to have these conversations, right? Are you going to be accepted in her family? Is she going to be accepted in our family? If you are not going to be accepted in her family, then what's going to happen with the grandparents and the grandchildren? What's that relationship going to look like? And so, what the parents are trying to do as they seek to address this issue is to look for a spouse or a mate for their son or daughter that is able to maintain certainly the social level that a child is, her, particularly daughters. Okay, you know, my daughter has a car, she has a house, she has a pool in the back. All right, she can travel when she wants to. What do you have? I really don't have anything.
Mm.
What do your parents have? My parents are poor, and
Oh,
so the parents are like, all right, so look, okay, he's a very nice guy. I like him. I get why you like him. Okay, but one of the first things that goes wrong in relationships is the financial issue. You can't pay the bills, you can't pay rent, food, and so they're aware of that. And so the
yes.
conversations they're having, the questions they're asking are very practical, right?
Mhm.
Um, Sex is great, all right? But if you put a man and a woman together and you give them time, you know, their sex will be great. Any man and any woman. We're in a culture where uh, that's no longer believed. So you've got to go try these different things, like your butterfly and different flowers, right?
Oh, God.
It's not useful behavior.
Okay.
And so when parents are selecting children for, spouses for their children,
Mhm.
there's a whole lot of consideration. They're investigating who these people are and so on.
There really is. Yeah.
Yes.
Something that's really closely related to what you're speaking to. We know that
Mm-hmm.
that right now we're in a time of awakening. There's a
Uh-huh.
lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
So many listeners are evolving in their
Uh-huh.
understanding of who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that speaks to their faith, their identity.
Mm-hmm.
How can marriage hold space for that growth, for that evolution and unfoldment as a person perhaps begins to decolonize their mind, perhaps
Right.
begins to step away from,
Mm-hmm.
the Western colonized way of being and begins to take
Mm-hmm.
on the ancestral, the Torah. How do we
Mm-hmm.
navigate that?
That requires a deconstruction of religious ideals.
Mm.
Um, if you have a philosophy that's religious, which is you pitch tents, you have crusades, and you coerce people to
Mm.
become part of your religion,
Right.
and that
Proselytize. Hmm.
exactly, and that if you're not part of this religion, you're going to be lost in hell, so on and so forth. You're going to burn for hell and never know. If you have those kind of ideas, it becomes very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But when you begin to decolonize your mind and you recognize that the Creator did not create religion, you can go and check Genesis chapter 1. You will not see any place in Genesis chapter 1 where He created a church or religion.
Right.
He created
Right.
the earth, He created trees, He created life, happiness, joy, pleasure. All these things were created by the Creator. That's what you're moving towards in the awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about losing your soul or anything. It's about beginning to discover who you are
Mm-hmm.
as a person and what is your relationship to the creative universe, right? Now, I'll share something very briefly. So we have these two theories. We have a theory of creation that's thousands of years old, and that's based in substance. But what do I mean by that? Well, God says in the beginning, He created the earth. Does the earth still exist? Yes, it does. Okay, so that's a fact. We can see that. He created man and woman. And we can see that. He created man and woman to produce children. We can see that. All of that still exists. He created man and woman with this tremendous thing we call a sex drive. And that still exists. What was the first instruction that God gave to Adam and Eve? Go have great sex, right? And replenish the earth. Okay, He created trees and fruit and vegetables. All of that still exists. Just over, within the last 200 years, we have this other theory to develop, right? And this other theory says that men came from monkeys, right? And we're asked to believe it. So we're supposed to believe this theory. Just work with me here on this, right? So you're believing this idea, but you've never seen a man coming from a monkey, right? We're told it was a primordial soup, it was a big bang, but that happened millions of years ago, and we didn't see that.
Right.
And then dinosaurs were 66 million years ago. We haven't seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything changed when there was this meteor that hit the earth, and everything died, and then life arose out of nowhere. And now what we have is what we have. But that's a process that we've never seen. We've never seen disorder producing order, but we're asked to believe that.
Mm.
And then we're told that these two theories are that this other theory where we have to believe is real. And so all the things that we can see and that we experience is not.
Mm.
Right? Even though one is imaginary and the other is practical.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So here's the question. In terms of our moving back to an understanding of ourselves, do we want to believe and imagine? Or do we want to look at structures that work, that are existential, right? If you have sexual intercourse with a woman and she is fertile, she's going to produce a child. That's existential. Okay? If you drive around a bend that says 40 miles an hour at 80 miles an hour, that's existential. It doesn't matter how much you believe or how much you imagine that's not going to be the case. It doesn't even matter if you have a crucifix in front of you and Jesus is on there. You know, He might be closing His eyes and kind of trying to figure out what you're doing, but you're going off the cliff. This is existential. Okay? Guy breaks in my house 6 weeks ago. This is just an analogy. Police can't figure out who it is up until now. All right. So the people who've come up with this theory, I should be able to go to them and say, okay, look, you can figure out what happened 66 million years ago. Okay. This guy broke in my house 6 weeks ago. Tell me who he is. Right. So if you're going to come back into a knowledge of self, then you cannot base your existence on a belief system. It's got to be on a knowledge system. What do you
Knowledge.
know? What do you
Yes.
know?
Hmm.
And once you begin to explore a knowledge system, then things begin to work. Why? Because they're existential. If you do not drink water, you're going to die of thirst.
Hmm.
If you do not eat food, you will starve to death. These are existential.
They are. They
So,
are.
in a relationship where people are waking up,
Mhm.
you want to focus on the things that are existential, right? Not on the things that you believe. Just because you believe it doesn't mean that it's true. The only thing true about that is that you believe it,
Hmm.
but believing it doesn't make it true.
It does.
So there you go. It's if you're at the point where you're beginning to realize that there are things about this world that don't really make a lot of sense.
Pain.
Many of the things that you were taught to be true, you're beginning to realize there are not, uh, and they are. Uh, everything these days is an agenda. Somebody has an agenda about something, and
Yeah.
those agendas are being very feverishly worked upon.
Hmm.
And you begin to realize that, which many people are. Then you start with what you know,
Hmm.
right? What do you know that works? I think one of the biggest challenges that people are going to experience when a person, for example, gets to the point where they recognize that religion isn't working, the tendency is to dump God,
The baby with the bathwater? No.
baby with the bathwater. We dump God, and so one of the things that I'm saying to people who will have a chat with me occasionally,
Hmm.
I say, read it again for the first time, not as a religious text, but as a text that's existential. It's given instructions. So when it says in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, can you still see the heaven and the earth? That's well,
It's right
there's
here.
this entity. However you want to, we're going to talk about him later on. You'll discover him later on. But he says that, so you work with that. And he says the first day, the second day, the third day. Do you still see these things that he talks about? Yeah, I do. Okay, we'll work with that. This is what you know.
Okay.
And you keep working through that process, looking for things you know, and begin to explore with a sense of awe
Mhm.
uh, the things that you discover as you go along, because there are quite awe inspiring things when you're studying Torah. It's
Every
incredible
moment.
every moment,
Yes. Hmm.
right? But it does require us to remove the religious pieces from it uh, and not be held to this these fragments
Mhm.
that have, to one extent or the other, uh, kept our minds imprisoned and in chains that Bob Marley talks about breaking those mental chains,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And as we always say, read it again
For the
for the
first
first
time.
for the first time. And if you don't understand, don't make stories up. Keep reading.
Keep reading. Well, I think that right there is a mic drop.
Yes.
This has been so excellent. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. Total
And
Rabbi.
thank you. Thank you. Toda Rabbi.
Oh, yes. I would love to have you on again,
Okay.
there is one last thing that I would
Hmm.
like to ask before we close. So
Hmm.
here we go. We're speaking about ancient writings,
Hmm.
truth,
Hmm.
right? Now, if you could write one line of advice in
Hmm.
the marriage scroll
Uh-huh.
for future generations that would just take those relationships to the top, what would
Uh-huh.
you say?
I would say just focus on being the best version of yourself that you could be. Now that's a bit of a cliche, but the focus. So let me finish like this.
Okay.
There's this prayer we call the Serenity Prayer, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So every now and again I sit and I explain the Serenity Prayer. It says, It starts with this. It starts with God. And very often people say, God grant me. I said, no, that's not what it is. It says God. And then it says, grant me the serenity. So serenity is a peace that passeth understanding, right? It's like shalom.
Shalom.
Is this peace that passeth understanding? I say, God grant me the serenity, peace that passeth understanding, to accept the things I cannot change. What are the things you can't change? But the things you can't change in a relationship is the other person.
Exactly.
That's completely outside of your purview. You cannot change the other person. Okay? So God grant me the serenity, peace to accept people as they are. Then it says, God grant me the courage to change the things I can. But what are the things that you can change? I can change me, but it requires courage for me to go and be looking into all those dark places of the abuse and conflict and all of that,
Okay.
and begin to think to myself, maybe, just maybe, that 50% of the problems in our relationship, I should take ownership of.
Hello.
Right?
Who's the common denominator?
There you go. Right? And then the final one is, and the wisdom to know
To
the
know the
difference.
difference.
The wisdom to know what's my stuff and what's the other person's stuff. Right? And then you use serenity to accept them as they are, because you would never change them.
Right, right.
Certainly not by design, but change you. And what is remarkable, this is what is absolutely remarkable. When we start to work on ourselves and we begin to grow, it is very interesting to observe the growth of the other person and then ultimately the growth of the relationship, right? So personal growth drives other growth, the
Hello.
growth of others.
What are we
And
speaking about here?
there you go.
Energy, frequency, and vibration.
Energy, frequency, and vibration. And it just changes without notice. And you begin to benefit from the changes that occur in the relationship. So my final, my on that scroll, I would say, be the best version of yourself that you can be, with purpose,
With
every day,
us.
with purpose,
Every moment has a new
every moment.
opportunity to choose again.
There you go.
Yes. This is fabulous. All right, I'll be reaching out. We're going to do this again. We've only touched the first layer.
Well, thank you for the invitation. This is really a pleasure having this chat with you as a fellow therapist. So next time I need to be asking the questions. we need to get, we need to begin to explore your wonderful experience as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, and as a therapist.
That would be fabulous. I would love to share and how hypnosis, we can demystify
There
hypnosis,
you go.
how that can support anything that we're doing.
Excellent. So now we have all the material for the next session.
We've got it. It's done. All right. Very soon.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
Blessings. Have a good
Toda.
one.
Thank
Shalom.
you. Shalom. That was fascinating and amazing. And I hope you got a whole lot from that conversation. I know you did if you're really honest. So, to help us to anchor that in, we're going to do a little bit of a journaling exercise. And no worries, if you don't have time right now, you can always come back to this. So, we're going to do a couple of journaling prompts. If you don't have a piece of paper or your journal right there, take a moment to get it, pause it, and I want you to write a title: Opening Through the Cracks. Okay. So here's the question. Here's the prompt. And I want you to answer this. In what ways has love, whether in marriage, in family, or friendship, invited me to open more deeply. I'll say it again. In what ways has love, whether in marriage, family, or friendship, invited me to open more deeply? Let's take a moment to think about that. Opening isn't always easy, right? Okay, the next one. What part of me had to break, shift, or surrender to make space for real connection? Hmm. This is about making space, right? What part of me had to break, shift, or surrender to make space for real connection? Okay. And so maybe from what you've learned through experience, maybe some things that this conversation has helped you to notice. What does a sacred aligned union look like to me now? Beyond fantasy, beyond fear, what does it look like? What do you want to strive for in a future mate, current mate? This is about honesty. It's not about perfection or what's right or wrong. The goal is clarity, not closure. So take your time. Maybe you paused and you could go through these. Maybe you've written them down. All right. Ready to go into a meditation? No, meditation always seals it, doesn't it? So let's begin with a deep breath. Ah, breathing in through the nose and exhaling out. And let's do one more very deep breath. And exhale out. And go ahead and close those eyes and bring your breath down to its natural rhythm in the body. Just making sure that the breath is full and complete. Making sure to exhale slowly and fully. And imagine yourself as a beautiful clay vessel, one that has traveled through many hands, many seasons. Perhaps it's been chipped. Maybe you've even cracked. But every fracture has made you more whole, more humble, more open to receive. And in this stillness, I invite you to feel a golden light just pouring into you. It flows into the cracks, flows into the fractures, the chips, not to erase them, but to fill them with light. Oh, you are not broken. You are seasoned. You are not too late. You are being shaped even now. You are a vessel made for sacred love. Not perfect love, but true love. I want you to just stay with this light. Allow it to breathe into every part of you. Parts that once felt unworthy, unseen, unheard, undervalued. And let this be the moment you remember. Your heart is worthy of covenant, of unification. You are ready to pour and be poured into. And with that, I want you to just smile to yourself. Take a deep breath and come on back to this present moment. What a beautiful journey. We've peeled back layers. We've sat with truths and touched the deep roots of what it means to walk in union with another soul. Marriage isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming a person who can love fully, truthfully, and sacredly in every season. May the wisdom shared today plant seeds in your heart, seeds of clarity, of passion, of connection. And may you remember, a house built on love and aligned with divine principles can weather anything. Until next time, walk in alignment, speak in truth, and love like it's holy, because it is. Until next time, this is Tamara signing off.
Yeah.